let's begin by praying that the spirit of our learning should be to bring home the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents, and bring a speedy end to this war.
Amen.
Okay, so here we're at the beginning actually of a short part of the sugya, and to recap something from the Mishnah, just a sec. Let's go back and look at the Mishnah for a second. Okay, so we're still on the first Mishnah, and oh, and here's Michael Werner. He said he'd be late, so let's just let him connect. Okay. Hi, we're just starting actually. So we're looking at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Yom Kippurim asur ba'achila v'shtiya v'rechitza v'sicha v'nilat ha'sandal v'tashmish ha'mita v'hamel v'kala yuchitzu et b'neihem v'chayat yinolat ha'sandal divrei Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim osrim. So we discussed that. Ha'ochel kechotevet hagasa כמה וכגרינתה, ושותה מלא לגנב חייב. Now we're up to this part. It says, כל האוכלים מצטרפים לככותבת. וכל המשקים מצטרפים למלוא לגנב. האוכל ושותה אין מצטרפים. So let's just remind ourselves of this part of the Mishnah. כל האוכלים מצטרפים לככותבת. All foods join together to make a kikotevet. What does that mean?
It means that if you're eating within a certain unspecified space of time, if you're eating these small morsels, if all these small morsels within, if all those dollops within that space of time add up to a kotevet, it's or exceeded a kotevet, then you're chayav.
Right. Well, up to and including the kotevet. So yeah, in other words, not that you have to eat dollops, but it means that even if you eat small amounts of various foods, right? You could also eat just one food, but you could also eat 10 foods. So you could have, a whole meal with all kinds of different foods. And each one of them would be less than kikotevet, but the moment you've eaten a kikotevet, as you say, toch kedei achilat pras, then you're chayav. And then similarly for mashkin, you could drink a melolugmav of whatever drink you're drinking. You could also drink a little bit of 10 different drinks. But as long as it reaches the shiur of melolugmav, toch kedei achilat pras, or toch shtiyat revi'it, different opinions, then you're chayav. And lastly, ha'ochel v'shoteh ein mitztarfin. Eating and drinking do not join together. What is that?
If you were to eat less than the kotevet and drink less than the malay lukmav, then they wouldn't combine to be chayav.
Right. Good. So with that, let's go and see what the Gemara says on this part of the Mishnah. So this is where
and anyway, since they are not measured the same way, you can't mix them. This is
so the question.
There are two categories which are measured in different way. That you can't There's no way that you can mix them.
So let's dwell on that just for a moment. So one reason, so what you're saying is the reason that Ochlin and Mashkin can't be mitzaref, they can't join together and make a shiur, is because A, their shiurim are different
Are
shiurim,
different. Yeah.
and B, the that because of the nature of the way those shiurim are measured, you can't join them together. So
that makes sense.
it makes sense, but is that what the Mishnah means? What's another possibility of understanding the Mishnah that says Ochlin and Mashkin are not mitzaref? So your point is, of course they're not mitzaref because they have different shiurim and the shiurim don't mesh; they don't go together. But what's another way of understanding Ochlin and Mashkin and not mitzaref?
They're just essentially different categories.
They're right. In other words, I could also just say that they're completely different categories. And because what's the point? We keep coming back to a single concept regarding eating on Yom Kippur. How do Chazal establish, what's the basis for the establishment of the different shiurim for eating and for drinking? Or for each of the shiurim, I should say. Why is eating a kikotevet asur, whereas all other isurei ochlin are measured in the kazayit, which is a much smaller measure? So what did we say? Why are you not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur?
It's Yeshuva Dat.
Right. In other words, you're not allowed to eat because the Torah says, "Kol nefesh asher lo tu'uneh be'etzem hayom hazeh, b'nichrata nefesh hahi." That's a paraphrase. I don't think it's exactly right, but in other words, the point is that you don't eat on Yom Kippur because you're supposed to afflict yourself, and if you don't afflict yourself, you're chayav. And Chazal understood that affliction means not eating and not drinking. So at what point are you considered to be not afflicting yourself? At the point when you get, as Michael Schwartz says, at the point that you have Yishuv Hadas. So now let's think about, so why don't Ochlin and Mashkin, why aren't they mitzaref?
Because basically one reaches a point of Yeshuv Hadas at different points.
Well, or to tweak it,
Or rather, like it's like eating a little bit. I mean, if you eat less than the kotevet, you're not going to have Yeshuv Hadas, even if you end up drinking enough to put you over the edge, as it were.
right. In other words, I could say to Paul, you know what? They're both volumetric measurements. Now, the nature of the measurements are different because the kotevet is an absolute measure and Melo Lugmav is a relative measure. But I could say for myself, I could figure out what the volume of food and drink would be that would equal either a kikotevet or a Melo Lugmav. But the problem is, even if I say that I've consumed that amount of food and drink, let's say a kikotevet, the volumetric measure of the kikotevet of food and drink, I won't have Yishuv Hadat. Yishuv Hadat is going to come from either drinking a certain amount or eating a certain amount. But combining the two doesn't give me Yishuv Hadat. And that's the reason that they're not going to be mitzaref. Now, it fits into the very notion of why the measurements are different, right? And we have a different measurement of food than we do of drink. and we have the absolute measure and the relative measure, because each of those things are reflective of the Yishuv Hadat that one would get by consuming either food or drink in that measure. But the real reason that they're not mitzdaref would seem to be that you're not going to get Yishuv Hadat if you combine
Could
them.
you imagine that you are measuring the quantities beforehand, for you are preparing food, and then you know exactly how many milliliters is your legimot, and you could prepare also what you are drinking, and then mix them and eat them. So you would be okay with the quantities, but they are mixed now. Would that not be acceptable?
Acceptable to be chayav.
Yes, of course, yes.
Well, that's the thing. The point is, it depends. In other words, kol zman that you don't have an actual kikotebet of food, or kol zman that you don't have an actual melodugmav of drink.
Yeah.
Even if you supplemented the lesser shear with one or the other, then no, you won't have Yishuv Hadat. And Chazal says that you need to get to this level of Yishuv Hadat. So merely consuming food and drink together in a shiur, let's say a kekotebet, or the shiur, the volumetric equivalent of
The volume minus, yes, minus some quantity to not get to it.
Right. But like you said, that's what I mean. You could figure out what the measurement would be, right? You could, like you said, like you could prepare, and but it won't matter. But by the way, of course, that's important to know for
Are you
people.
allowed to prepare? Maybe it's
Well,
on the Yom Kippur.
Well, what I was going to say, what I was going to say is that this is actually important information for people who need to eat or drink on Yom Kippur. So it means that you could eat less than a shiur and drink less than a shiur, toch k'dei achilat pras, and you won't be chayav. So if you have to eat b'shiurin, right, that's the idea of eating in shiurin, then you could do that. And that might be what the doctor prescribes. He might say, you have to eat a certain amount and you have to drink a certain amount. So what you'll do is you can eat less than a shiur and drink less than a shiur in the same time frame, and they don't combine to make a shiur.
What do we do?
Enough. What's that?
What do we do with soup, which is liquid but consumed with the food?
So what I can tell you is that this question, in a sense, comes up in other areas of halacha. But if it's a brothy soup, then it's going to be considered to be drink. If it's a very thick, in the time of the Gemara, they used to eat something called mikpeh, which was some kind of like a very thick stew. And that might be considered to be food. And, if the question arises, then ask your local rabbi for their opinion, and the doctor, whatever doctor you're consulting. It's a real question. It's a serious question. When I make soup, it depends. A lot of the soups I make are very thick, like a very thick cholent. And so that may already not be considered to be liquid, right? That might be considered to be, ochli. It's a good question, which we'll leave aside for now, and hopefully none of you will ever have to know the answer for personal halachic reasons. But it's an interesting question. So along these lines now, the Gemara is going to go into this. It says kol ha'ochli, right? So That's the quote from the Mishnah, that all ochin are mitzdarfin. All ochin join together to make a shiur. So Amarav Papa, achal umtza umilcha mitzdarev. If somebody ate some a slab of meat with salt, that joins together, that combines. The afal gav de lavachilahi, even though that's not eating, kevan de achle inshi, since people eat it, mitzdarfin, they join together. So what does it mean? What's the question here? If you eat meat and salt together, that's mitzdaref. So the meat and the salt are mitzdaref to
A shiur.
to a shiur.
To less than a shiur.
Well, in other words, they will be mitzdaref up to the point of being a shiur. In other words, so what's the chidush there?
But
What's
they are both food. Milcha.
It's
מלח
actually
וגם אונצה הם food.
it's
Well,
not
so-
clear. It's not clear that melech on its own is food. It's like we would not sit down to a meal with salt on its own.
Okay, so we
And
learned.
so the Hidush here is that even if you add something that is not clearly food to the food and it becomes part of the food, then it's actually then it becomes part of the volumetric measurement.
Correct. Let's remind ourselves here for a second. Just a sec. Okay, we saw this.
The
We
meat
saw
they
it in
sell,
Halakha.
yeah,
We
the
saw
meat they
this
sell
in
today is full of water.
What's that?
The meat they sell today
Oh.
is full of water.
Oh, it's full of water. Yes, but nonetheless. Okay, I'm a little bit out of it. Just a sec. We saw this in Halakha. Let me see if I can bring it up quickly. I apologize. A little out of it. Let me share a screen with you. So we looked at this in the Shulchan Aruch. We skipped some things at some point, and we looked in the Shulchan Aruch. So this is how it's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. This is Aruch Chaim Siman Tafresh Yud Bet. Ochel b'Yom Kippurim ki chotevet hagasa chayav, u'hu pachot mikabetza ma'at. It's a little less than a kabetza. That was the sugi we did earlier. B'shiur zeh shaveh l'chol adam, bein lenanas, bein le'od melech habashat. Right, this is the same shear for a dwarf or to a giant like Og Melech HaBashan. Then it says, Kol ha'ochlim mitztarfin l'shiur zeh, afilu melach she'al habasar, v'tzir shel yarak, which we'll see in a second in the Gemara. Aval chila shtiya ein mitztarfot. So that's the point. One of the things that we learned along the way is that food that's not ra'ui to be eaten. In other words, things that are not ra'ui to be eaten as food. You're not chayav. We learned that before. So here, for example, later on in the Ramah, says Shatamashkin shenan ru'uyin l'shtiya. If you drank drinks that are not fit to be drunk, kigon tzir or morias, like brine or morias, which is, these are like salty or briny things that are going to be part of the food. Like if you get gefilte fish in a jar, then it comes with, the gooey stuff that's with the fish. The chometz chai, or raw vinegar. Your patur. Chometz mazug chayav. Diluted vinegar, you would be chayav. And in fact, people drink that. People drink diluted vinegar. So back to the Gemara. So the point is, like we said, like Paul said, or Michael, whoever said, melach is not a food that you eat. So in other words, if you ate a kikotevet hakasa of salt, you won't be chayav. But if you eat the salt along with the meat, then it becomes part of the shiur. So that's what Rav Papa means.
Sorry.
Achal umtza umilcha mitzdaref. So if you ate meat and salt, that combines to make a shiur. The afal gav zelav achilahi, even though it's not eating, meaning even though eating salt is not considered to be eating for the purposes of being chayav on Yom Kippurim. But because people eat it, meaning people eat the meat and salt together, mitzdarfin, then it's mitzdaref.
So, I mean,
Michael,
the issue
what
here,
do
I
you
would
want to
guess, the issue I here would guess would again be Yeshuv Hadas. It's like eating salt on its own is not going to give you Yeshuv Hadas, and probably quite the contrary. But if it's added to something, it would give Yeshuv Hadas.
So you could say so the Rav Papa doesn't put it quite that way, but yes, you could say that. In other words, the reason it's going to be mitzdaref, he says the reason it's mitzdaref is because that's how people eat. You eat meat with salt. And so therefore, we don't discount it because yes, it will ultimately contribute to your Yeshuv Hadas. Good point. And now Reish Lakish gives this other example, which we just saw in the Shulchan Aruch. Amar Reish Lakish, Tzir shall get gabei yerek mitztaref l'kekotevet b'yom kippurim. So the tzir, the tzir is supposed to be like what comes out of the vegetable when you cook it. Just a second. Let me see something. Okay. So Reish Lakish is saying something very similar to Rav Papa, right? He's saying that the tzir, so you don't eat tzir by itself, but you eat it as when you're eating the vegetable that you cooked, you'll eat the tzir that came out of the vegetable. So that is mitzdaref l'kekotevet b'yom kippurim. So the Gemara now says pshita. So then now it's obvious. Mahu detema. So here, this gets to a question Michael Werner asked earlier. Mahu detema mashkehu. Here, what's the difference between the tzir and the melach? The tzir is a liquid. So you might think mashkehu kamashmala. So it comes to teach us. So let's understand. So what's the Gemara saying? If the tzir is mashke, if it's a liquid, so what's the problem?
Then it's shtia, and so therefore it would be part of a different measurement.
And what did we say? What did the Mishnah say about achila and shtia?
They no mitzrafim.
They're mitzdarfin. So the chidush of Reish Lakish is that the chidush of Rav Papa is that when you eat meat with salt, the salt is mitzdaref, even though it's not ra'ui to eat by itself. And here the Gemara is saying, what about the tzir and the yerek? So you would think that that's also like the meat and the salt. But so the Gemara says pshita, obviously. That's the way people eat their cooked vegetables. But the Gemara says, but you might think that the tzir is a mashke, and the mashke is not mitzdarev. So here we have a case where something that's liquid does combine with food. In this context, the tzir is considered to be ochel. If you had the tzir by itself, it would be mashke. But if you're eating in the context of having yerek with it, then it's considered to be ochel, and it's taref to the shiur of ochli. Kamash malan, and the Gemara says, kol achshurei uchla, uchlahu. Anything that's there to, as it were, prepare or make the food fit for eating is ochel. It itself becomes or is considered to be ochel for this purpose of eating on Yom Kippurim. Rashi comments here, achshure uchla, mashkeh haba lematek et ha'ochel, uchlahu. That the liquid that comes to sweeten the food, and I think by sweeten, I think he just means that to give it more flavor, right? To flavor the food, it itself is ochel. So we understand, because people, when we cook, we tend to cook with more than one ingredient. So maybe you're cooking, I don't personally cook meat, but let's say if you're cooking meat, so yes, you might put various spices on it, you'll put salt on it, maybe you'll put barbecue sauce on it. So all of that is considered to be ochel in the context of ochel. Okay. Let's move on to the next part of the Gemara. Maresh Lakish, ochel achila gasa b'yom kippurim. Patur. Somebody eats literally a fat meal, a fat eating on Yom Kippur, they are exempt. Maitama, what's the reason? Asher lo tu'unektiv. The Torah says, the one who does not afflict, in other words, the one who doesn't afflict themselves. That's what's written. Prat lemazik. That excludes the one who's doing damage. So what does all of this mean? So what's achila gasa? What do we mean by achila gasa?
Eating to the point where it makes you sick, maybe?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Sorry, eating to the point where it makes you sick.
Yes, something like that. In other words, we understand achila gasa is going to be something that you're eating past the point of being satisfied. Right?
Gorging.
Far past gorging. Okay, you could say. So for that you're patur. What's the reason? Asher lo tu'unektiv. The Torah says the one who does not afflict themselves. Prat lemazik. That excludes the one who is doing damage. So, what's the damage? Who's doing the damage and what's the damage?
I suppose if you eat so much that you actually get sick, then you're doing damage.
So you, the eater, are doing damage to yourself. You're damaging yourself, would be the implication. We're going to expand on this concept in a moment, but let's just take it for the moment the way Reish Lakish presents it. Let's look
Expand,
at how, what's that?
Expand, so to speak.
Let's look at how Rashi understands this. So Rashi says, Achila gasa, shachal leila yom ha-kippurim al hasova. Somebody who ate on the night of Yom Kippur al hasova, right? After they were already full. Shahaya saveya misuda shihifsikba. He was already sated, he was already full from his Suda Mafseket, from the last Suda he ate while he was still allowed to eat before Yom Kippur. The Kol Masha Chal Misha Chashecha, everything that he eats after it gets dark, Achila Gasa Haita. That's gorging, I'll use your term, right? That's eating an Achila Gasa, V'shelo Lahana'a. It's not for pleasure. It won't give him pleasure. My time, Asher lo tunektiv prat lamazik. This excludes the mazik. Rashi says, excuse me, lezeh she'eno mivatel mimenu shum inui. Prat lamazik lezeh. This excludes the one who's doing damage to this one. She'eno mivatel mimenu shum inui al yidei achilazu. He's not canceling out any suffering from this eating, by way of this eating. In other words, as he continues to eat al hasova, he's not getting any pleasure, he's not getting any benefit from eating this. Ela maziku eta ochlin ve'eta tzmo. He's damaging both the food and himself. Now, Rashi seems to add in this idea that he's damaging the food. He's not only damaging himself, he's also damaging the food. How is he damaging the food?
It just won't be there. You will have eaten it.
So when you eat normally, do you call that damaging the food? It also won't be there if you're eating a regular achila, not achila gasa. Would you call that damaging?
Well, in the sense that it, like, if you think about what makes food, it would be, among other things, the pleasure that you get from it. I mean, the nutrition, of course, but the pleasure you get from it. And so if you eat, and so an argument could be made that if it's a form of self torment, then it's no longer food. And so therefore one is damaging the essential property of the food as food. You're not damaging the physical object, but you're damaging sort of what makes it food.
Well, or I could say I'm damaging the physical object. In other words, if I here, take a straight example. If I take a loaf of bread and I set it on fire, am I damaging the food?
Of course.
Of course, right? So take a simple, that's mazik, right? So And there, it's in a halachic category. If somebody comes along and burns a loaf of bread that you own, they have to pay you damages for the bread that they set on fire. By the same token, if I take food and I eat it in such a way that it gives no benefit to anyone, it's no different than if I set it on fire. It has the same result. So I'm damaging the food. Now, if it's my own food, so I don't pay myself damages, and that's why what Rashi says here seems to be a little strange, because, okay, he's damaging the food, but who cares? Who cares about the thing that we care about?
An argument
Wait,
also.
let me finish.
Right.
Let me finish. The main point, in other words, the point from the Gemara seems to be, what does the Gemara want? The Gemara wants to learn out from Asher Lo Tu'uneh that excludes the mazik. It excludes the person who's doing damage. And so Reish Lakish wants to bring that's a proof, or the Gemara is bringing for Reish Lakish, this is a proof, to say that somebody who eats al hasova, all they're doing is damaging food, because they're not getting any personal benefit or pleasure from it, and the food is now, the food is gone. The food has been destroyed. What did you want to say, Michael?
But by the same token, if you eat food for pleasure, you're also, by that argument, if you're eating food for pleasure, you're also damaging the food.
Why, huh?
Because it's, the loaf of bread is no longer a loaf of bread, or it's less than a loaf of
so what? So
here, in some senses, it seems to be that, like, it's not. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, so what you're saying is true in this regard. I gave the example of somebody who burns a loaf of bread that belongs to you. If I come along and eat your loaf of bread, I'm also a mazik. So you're right. In other words, in both of those cases, I have destroyed your food. The difference here is that you're eating your food. So somebody who damages themselves, or if you damage your own property, you're not liable in the sense that you don't have to pay yourself for your damage. That's a din in the Ziki, right? If you decide you want to, burn your loaf of bread, you can do that. Maybe there are other reasons like you shouldn't do it, even halachic reasons, but you're not going to be liable. But nonetheless, you'll be damaging it. So here, when we're talking about food, what Rashi's introducing here is an idea that when you eat food beyond the point of, I'm not going to say this right, satiety, is that how you say it? Thank you. Beyond the point of satiety, then not only have you damaged yourself because you're making yourself sick, you're physically harming yourself, but you also damaged the food because you've destroyed the food to no good end, to no what's the word I'm looking for? To no productive, for no purpose, for something like that. Now, there's a reason why Rashi's introducing that concept here. We'll see it in a moment in the Gemara. It's going to be an important concept. Now, let's think for a moment, though, about the proof text of Asher Lo Tu'uneh. How do I learn from that? One second. How do I learn from how do I learn from that it excludes the mazik? Let's look at the pasuk for a moment, just bringing it up. Here, let's see. Um, okay, so we looked at this pasuk before. Parshat Emor, where we have some of the dinim of Yom Kippurim. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Emor, Ach be'asor lachodesh hashvi'i az Yom Kippurim hu, Mikra kodesh yelachem, v'initem et nafshotechem, v'kravtem yishel Hashem. V'chol melacha lo tasu be'etzem hayom hazeh, כי יום כיפורים הוא לכפר עליכם לפני השם אלוקיכם, כי כל הנפש אשר לא תאונה בעצם היום הזה, ונכרתה מימיה. Any soul, for whoever it is who shall not afflict himself on that same day, shall be cut off from his people. Anyone who does not afflict himself on this day. So, what does the Gemara mean when it says, I learn from here that excludes the mazik, that excludes the one who's doing damage? How does it exclude the one who's doing damage?
The mazik is afflicting himself.
So you could say the mazik is afflicting himself. So in other words, he's not left the category of a sherlo, he's not left the category of inui nefesh, and he's afflicting himself. Second. So this is what the Torah Tamima says. Kigon shachal betchilat alayel sova me'erev yom kippurim she'az achilato mazeket lo. Right? He's bringing Rashi's example, right? That you ate a big meal on Erev Yom Kippur, such that eating any further is going to damage himself. It should be she'inam ru'yim la'achila. If he ate things that are not ra'ui to be eaten, like, and then we'll get into this in a moment in the Gemara. If you chewed on peppers, meaning like peppercorns, or if you chewed on ginger, things like that. It refers you to other places where in Parshat Achrei. This is in Parshat Emor. Okay. So Asher Lo Tu'uneh, and this person is being me'aneh. So he's afflicting himself by eating. So he hasn't left the category of inui nefesh. So that would explain the part where we say that he's a mazik to himself. It doesn't immediately explain the part that Rashi says where he's damaging the food. That seems to be a corollary. Because if he's damaging himself, then we'll say what I said a few minutes ago, which is he's damaging himself by eating this food, and that means that the food itself is just the object of being damaged, because it's not being used as food anymore. It's just an object of something that was damaged or being damaged. Let's go back to the Gemara. Oh, that worked. What's the next part of the Gemara? The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yirmiyah now brings a ma'amar in the name of Reish Lakish. Zar she'achal truma. Oh, wait, I just wanted to say one other thing. So I didn't prepare a shear for Pesach, but this is a connecting point, right? What else? What are you supposed to eat al hasova?
The afikomen.
Afikoman.
Right, because the din of eating the korban pesach, the kazayit of the korban pesach that you have to eat midioraita, you were supposed to eat it al hasova. So we don't have a korban pesach anymore, and so we eat a kazayit of matzah al hasova. So there, and the Gemara talks about in the last parak of Psachim. That's the source in the halacha, and there, it apparently though al hasova means to eat a little bit before satiety. In other words, you're supposed to eat a full meal. You're not supposed to get to a point where eating the matzah is now going to make you ill. But it should be the last thing you eat that makes you full, that brings you to satiety. So that's the al hasova of Psachim. And this is the al hasova of Yoma. Slightly different points in the eating process. Okay. Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yirmi, Amar Reish Lakish, Zar she'achal truma achila gasa, mishalem et hakeren, ve'no mishalem et hachomesh. So here we're going to learn a little bit of trumot. A zar, so zar means, we translate it as stranger. In this context of truma, what is a zar?
A non-Kohen.
Somebody who is not Kohen.
Someone who's not a non-Kohen. So a non-Kohen who eats truma achila gasa in this kind of gorging way. He pays the principal and he doesn't pay the fifth. Ki yochal prat lemazik. When he eats, and that excludes the mazik. We'll look at that pasuk in a moment. We'll look at the proof text in a moment. But in the meantime, let's just understand what's the halacha. Actually, you know what? We'll look at the pasuk because then you'll see the basis for the halacha. What's the din if a zar eats truma? Let's do a little review here from Parshat Emor. So this is it's the parak before Vashelo Tuna. It's also in Emor. Vaydeber Hashem al Moshe Lemor. Deber el Aaron v'el banav v'yinazru mikadshei b'nei Yisrael. Speak to Aaron and his sons, and they should separate themselves, from the holy things of Bnei Yisrael, the Kadshim of Bnei Yisrael. They will not profane my holy name, that they sanctify to me, Ani Hashem. Emor alehem l'dorotechem, kol ish asher yikrav mikol zarachem el hakodashim asher yagdishu b'nei Yisrael Hashem, v'tumato alav v'nichrota nefesh ahi milfanai Ani Hashem. So this is where we learn that a Kohen is tamei, is not allowed to come into contact or to eat kadshim. Ish mizera aron v'hutzaru ozah b'kadashim lo yuchar ad asher yitar. He gives specific examples of an ogeh b'chol tamei nefesh, o ish asher teitzei mimenu shechvat zera, o ish asher yiga b'chol sheret asher yitma lo, o ba'adam asher yitma lo, b'chol tumato. Nefesh asher tikabo v'tama ad ha'arev. Right, so it's telling you the process. If you become tamei in certain ways, then you're tamei until the evening. You're not allowed to eat kadshin until you go to the mikveh, right? And that's the first mission in brachos, that me'ematai korin et shema ba'aravim misha shekohanim nichnasim lechol b'trumatan. And when is that? That's a kohen who became tamei during the day, and he went to the mikvah, but he has to wait for Erev Shemesh before he can eat his truma. Uva Shemesh v'taher, the sun comes, in other words, the sun goes down, and he becomes tahor. Yachar yachal min kadashim, and afterwards he can eat his kadashim. Kidach mohu, that's his bread, that's his sustenance. Then it tells us in the Veila Trefa lo yochal tamava ani Hashem. Can't eat in the Veila Trefa. V'shamru and mishmarti v'lo yasu alav chayt u'metu vo ki yochalu ani Hashem. So there are consequences if you do this. Now it says b'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. So that's right. The toshav kohen v'sachir lo yochal kodesh. So a zar is not allowed to eat kadshim. That's regardless of whether they're tamei or not. Kohen can eat kadshim as long as he's tahor, but a zar is not allowed to eat kadshim at all. But there's exceptions. V'chohen ki yikneh nefesh kinyan kaspo hu yochal bo. So if a kohen acquires a soul with money, in other words, he buys a slave, then that slave can eat the kadshim. He becomes like an extension of the kohen for this purpose. Yilid beito heim yochul b'lachmo. The one who is born in his household, he will eat from his bread. Vat kohen, so that would mean any of his children, meaning what? Meaning including the girls, because the girls are not going to serve as kohenot. But if you're a bat kohen, eats truma because she's yilid beito. But bat kohen kitiyel yishzar, if a bat kohen marries a non-kohen, he b'trumata kodashim lo tochel. She can't eat kodashim anymore. Bat kohen, bat kohen tiyeh almana grusha v'zera ein la v'shava al beit avia ki nureh milechem avia tochel v'chol zar lo yochal. Okay, so a bat kohen who was married but then was either widowed or divorced, and she has no children, then she goes back to her father's house as in her youth, and then she can eat milechem avia. In other words, now she can eat kadshim again. She goes back to being a kahanet, as it were. Now we're getting to the pasuk that the Gemara quotes. V'ish ki yochal kodesh bishgaga v'yasaf chamishito alav v'natan lekohen et kodesh. So what's the din? If you're ish, if you're a person who ate kodesh bishgaga, then what's the din? You add a fifth onto it, and you give that to the kohen. V'natan lekohen et kodesh. You give it to him as if it were it's to pay him back for the holy thing that you ate. So that's the din of a zar who eats truma, in this case. Excuse me. The zar who eats truma b'shogeg, he v'yasav chamishito alav. So what does he have to pay him? He has to pay him keren. He has to pay him for the food that he ate, plus a fifth. By the way, the fifth is actually, it's a fourth. The way that the Chazal understood chamishiton to mean, you take the value of a quarter of what you ate and you add it on. It becomes the fifth part. So it's actually more than 20, it's 25%. It's not 20%. Okay. So, ish ki yochal kodesh bishgaga. So now we go back to the Gemara. What was our Gemara talking about? What if you eat achila gasa? What if a zar eats truma in achila gasa? So what did we learn about eating achila gasa?
It's not considered eating. at least for the purpose of Yom Kippur, and this would suggest that it's also not considered to be eating for the purposes of Truma.
So it is and it isn't. In other words, so for the purposes of Yom Kippur, it's really not considered to be eating because, again, on Yom Kippur, the Isser isn't actually eating per se. The Isser Torah is to remove yourself from the state of Inui Nefesh. So if you're eating Achila Gasa, you're still Inui Nefesh. Here's what's happening. The person's eating it, so he consumed it. So it's not that it's not eating at all, but it's not eating for all intents and purposes. He pays for the Karen, he has to pay for the principal, but not for the Chomesh. So why is he paying for the principal and not the Chomesh? The Gemara says, Ki yochal prat lemazik. A person, right, who eats from Kodesh, he has to pay Karen and Chomesh, but that excludes the mazik. So why does he pay the Karen and not the Chomesh?
He's paying the Karen because he has to replace what he damaged, and he's not paying the Chumash because he's not deriving benefit from it. He's not. It's not like he's. It's like a fine on top of the what he took, and he's not getting benefit from it.
Yes, basically yes. So when he eats the food, so in a sense, like Michael Werner said, in a sense, it's not eating the way, for all intents and purposes. And we assume that eating, that let's say the default of eating is to eat and derive benefit from the eating. So he's not deriving benefit from the eating. And in fact, he's mazik. So what is he mazik? What did he damage?
The truma, the food, the truma, the damages to the coat.
Right. In other words, he damaged the property of the Kohen. And now we understand why Rashi introduced this concept in the previous comment, that a person who is eating achila gasa is really damaging. They're not only damaging themselves, but they're damaging the food that they're eating. Because now they're consuming food in such a way that it's not going to be beneficial to the person who's consuming it. So they might as well just have set it on fire. And that's what this guy is doing. So this Tsar who ate Truma, Achila Gasa, where he gorged himself with Truma, so he has to pay the Karen, like you say, because he did damage the Truma, like he took something from the Kohen, but he doesn't pay the Chomesh because the Torah says Ki yochal, when he eats, he has to pay Karen the Chomesh. But here it's not considered to be eating in that sense of consuming something for his benefit. Let's look at Rashi. Zar shechal truma b'shogeg, shechiyavo hakatuv tashlumei keren v'chomesh. A person who ate, a non-Kohen who ate truma unwittingly. What does it mean b'shogeg? What would be a case of shogeg, a person who ate truma b'shogeg?
Either he didn't realize that the food was truma, or he didn't realize that truma was forbidden to the Tsar.
Very good. Very, very good. So yes, either he was shogeg, not knowing this is truma, or he knew that it was truma, but he didn't think that eating truma was asur. So either way, the Torah is mechayev him to pay the principal plus the chomesh, but he's patur imachba al asova. But he'll be patur from the chomesh if he ate it when he was already stuffed. Ki yochal prat mazik, and Rashi says prat mazik et truma. Here the hezek is the food that he ate. He damaged the food. We don't care though he damaged himself. In other words, he also damaged himself, but that's not relevant to paying for the truma. He's gonna pay the Karen because he damaged the because he has to pay damages for what he took from the Kohen. But ki yochal, he only pays chomesh when he ate the truma, and this is not considered to be achila for the purposes of paying chomesh. Let's read a little bit more, because if we can read to the end here, then the next time we start, we'll be at the beginning of the next sugya. But I think you're all doing very well. Amar Rabbi Yirmi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Zar shekoses sa'orim shel truma, mishalem et hakeren, ve'eno mishalem et hachomesh. Ki yochal, prat mazik. So we bring a similar example in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, a zar who chews on barley corns that are truma. In other words, they're raw barley corns, raw pieces of barley. So he pays Karen, he pays the principal, and he doesn't pay the chomesh. Why? Because we learned from the same way that we learned before. Ki yochal, when you eat, or when the person eats, when the zar eats, he pays Karen l'chomesh, and that excludes the mazik. So here he didn't eat al hasova, but what did he do? He chewed on raw barley corns. And he consumed, not just that he chewed, like he chewed them up and swallowed them. So why is he patur from the chomesh?
Again, it's not really food. He's not really eating.
It's not really considered to be eating, because that's not the way you eat barley. So look at Rashi. Rashi says, shekoses. So Rashi first of all explains, kol davar shu'ochlo shelo kederech achilato karile koses. Anything that one eats not in the way it's normally eaten, that's called koses. That's what the word koses means. It's to consume something in a way that it's not normally consumed. So normally, people don't eat barley unless it's cooked, or at least unless it's parched. It has to be processed in some way before you eat it. When I was a little kid, I used to sometimes chew on pieces of pasta or eggshells. Sometimes I would try to eat eggshells. Okay, kids do strange things, but that's like this example. So here, all he's doing is damaging the truma. Even if he swallows it, even if he consumes it, he's just a mazik. He's not an ochel. He's not mekayim the pasuk that says ki yochal, when you eat truma, you have to pay keren v'chomesh. So you didn't really eat it, so he's only going to be chayav for the keren, like any mazik. But because he's a mazik, he's excluded from the pasuk that's telling me that he has to add the chomesh. So then we have the last case, Amar of Shizvi, Amar of Yochanan, another mamar in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Zar shebalash zifim shel truma v'hikiyan. This is a little gross. Somebody who swallowed prunes, shizifim. Rashi translates it into Old French. I don't know if Paul is still with us, if he has any comment about the Old French here. We'll see when he wakes up. But in any event, shizifin or shizifin. If he swallowed them, meaning he swallowed them whole, v'hikiyan, and then he threw them up. V'achalan acher, and then somebody else ate those prunes. Rishon mishalem keren v'chomesh. The first person is going to pay keren v'chomesh. Sheni ein mishalem ela demei eitzim larishon bilvad. The second one is only going to pay for their value as wood to the first one. Hold on, that's all he'll pay. So let's go through this. What's going on here? The first guy who eats is pretty straightforward. First guy took prunes of truma and he just swallowed them whole. So why is he chayav? Keren v'chomesh.
It's eating.
It's eating. Maybe he won't enjoy them because he didn't really chew them or anything like that. But we already learned earlier in this chapter when we talked about achilah, the definition of achilah is to have hana'at garon. It's like when the food gets to your throat, you swallow it. Once you've swallowed it, that's considered to be eating. So he ate them. So he's going to be chayav keren v'chomesh. And then he sticks his finger down his throat and he throws them up. And now this other guy comes along, hopefully washes them off a little bit, and then he eats them. So what's his din? He only pays Demei Eitzin to the first one. So what's Demei Eitzin? It's like I said, it's their value as if they were just wood. So it means that they no longer have value as food. But it's still an object, it's still something. So he'll pay that to the first one. Why does he pay Demei Eitzin to the first one?
What's first? Is it the Kohen or the first guy that ate it?
The first one would be the guy who ate them. Why should he pay? Why does the second guy pay the first guy anything?
I mean, I would think that either the act of the first guy's either his act of swallowing them, or his act of paying for them is a kinyan, and so once they come back up, they're his.
Well, even before, so what we'll see, basically, yes, he made a kinyan on what he swallowed. Let's say he didn't throw them up. So, but he made a kinyan, now he has to repay that. He has to repay that to the Kohen. But they became his. So the second guy who eats them owes money now to the first guy. But what's their status as truma?
I would think that after the first guy has acquired them, they're no longer truma.
Somehow it would seem to be that they've lost their status as truma, at least in part. Let's see how Rashi says. Shizifim, so he says, I don't know how to pronounce it. France, pronounce, I have no idea. And then the plus plus, in the this is the Hebrew translation of that, which is Shizifim. Bilaz, right, in Old French in this case. So Shebala belok sisa. Rashi emphasizes here and adds that the person Shebala, he's explaining Bala, that he swallowed, in contrast to Koses. So Koses meant he chewed them up and then swallowed them. And here he just swallowed them. So it implies that he didn't chew them. Okay, Vihikiyan, and then he threw them up, and then somebody else ate them. Rishon L'Shalem Karen B'Chomesh. Rashi says, Sha'af hi derech achilatan, because even though he's just swallowed them whole, that's derech achilatan. That is a way of eating that's still considered to be within the realm of achilah, the realm of normal eating. Sheni Mishalem Demei Etzim L'Rishon. The second one pays Demei Etzim to the first one. Shaharei Kinaan Harishon, like Michael Werner said. The first one acquired them. V'nitchayev b'tashlumehem, and he then became obligated to pay for them. V'hein einan re'uyot od, and now they're considered not to be fit for anything ela lahasaka, except to be burnt. Once he ate them and threw them up, even though the reality is that this other guy ate them, but we don't consider them for halachic purposes to be anything more than eitzim that you would just burn. So, of course, the value of wood is going to be much less than the value of prunes. So that's all he has to pay. That's all the second one has to pay. So you see how all these things are linked. We started off with Rav Papa. You talked about how Umtzu Milchar mitzdarei. Then we had Reish Lakish, who introduced the idea that Sir Shal Gabei Yerek is mitzdarei. And that led us to the next part of Reish Lakish. We're still talking about Yom Kippurim, that if you eat Achila Gasa Yom Kippurim, you're patur, because you haven't removed yourself from Yinui Nefesh when you eat Achila Gasa. And now that we've introduced this idea of Achila Gasa, and Achila Gasa takes you out of the normal range of what's considered to be Achila. So Reish Lakish applies it to this din in Trumot. So a zar who eats Truma Achila Gasa, he only pays Karen and not Chomesh, because what he did was considered to be Hezek. He damaged himself and he damaged the Truma. And then we take it out of the realm, we take it out of that realm, or let's say, I should say out of that realm. We continue along this line of thinking, and we say, you know what? A person, a zar, who consumes raw barley, even though that's not achila gasa, but it's also not regular achila. So it's similar to eating achila gasa in the sense that it's not the way you normally eat. So in a similar vein, for the same reason, essentially, he becomes a mazik. And so once he's a mazik, in other words, once he's left the pasuk of ki yochal, of eating, then he's just a mazik. So he pays Karen and not Chomesh, because you only pay Chomesh if you're an Ochel of Kachim. And he's not an Ochel of Kachim. And then we come to this last bizarre example of the person who swallowed Truma prunes whole, and then he threw them up, and somebody else ate them after he already threw them up. Yeah, I see, Paul, you're just waking up. So, but we're doing it just to see what the din is. So the din is the first one pays Karen v'chomesh, because even though he swallowed them whole, that is within the realm of normal achilah. And so he has to pay Karen v'chomesh, like anybody who eats, any zar who eats truma. But the second guy, by the time he ate them, he eats them, it's achilah, but what he's eating is not really considered to be food. So all he pays for is Demei Eitzi to the first one. And as we said, the first one acquired them when he ate them, and Haraya, he has to pay for them. Right? They became his once he ate them, and then he has to pay Karen v'chomesh. The second guy also acquired them, but what he acquired was no longer food. So he only pays for them as if they were wood, because our understanding of these recycled prunes, right, the prunes that were thrown up, we wouldn't consider them to be ra'ui la'achila. What could you do with them? You could use them as fuel. You could burn them. And that's all. So, Paul, we had a question for you. Rashi translates shizifin as Peresh Vav Nun Shin. France, Fronosh. I don't have access right now to my dictionary of Rashi's Old French. But does that word strike you as any kind of a word in French that you know that would have to do with prunes? Oh, prunes.
It's in
That's the word.
Rashi. In Rashi,
It's in Rashi. I'm reading it. He's saying it's prunes. I don't know how he's pronouncing it, but that's what it is. What's the word for prune in French?
prune, the prune,
How do you say it?
prune.
Prune. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
it. So it's also an Old French. So there you go. Okay, very good. So we're not going to meet next
So you
week.
see, did they pronounce the S at the end?
Yes.
Probably not, or maybe yes.
So that gets dropped at some point. How do you spell it in French?
P-R-U-N-E-S.
You have an
P-R-U-N.
S at the end?
If it's one prune, no,
Yeah.
but if it's generic, yes.
Uh-huh.
Say you eat food, je mange des prunes. Then
Uh-huh. So then you would add it.
you would add it, yes.
So we learned a little bit of Old French today.
No, that's not Old French. That's French.
So, but now you know. That's how that's also an Old French.
Mm.
There you go. Okay, so next week is Chol Moed we won't learn. And as far as I know, I will still be here the Wednesday after Pesach, so let's assume that we'll learn in 2 more weeks. And that's it for now. I wish everybody a Chag Sameach v'Kasher, and
כמה שאפשר, כן. חג שמח.
Chag Sameach, and
Mm.
may this Chag really be a geula for all of us, and especially for the Hatufim, for the hostages.
Amen. Chag Sameach. Thank you.
Laila Tov.
משחק שמח.
Bye-bye.
יישוב טוב.